Nancy Bell, and I'm going to be working with Ann and hopefully more of you on the Measure A study group. So obviously we need to have some better understanding about Measure A. So to put today's presentation into context, in 2012, voters approved Measure A, a quarter-cent sales tax to support parks, open space, and agricultural lands across Marin. The sunset date for this tax is March of this year. So a community survey was conducted last summer, and it found that 80% of respondents favored extending the measure. So based on those results, the Board of Supervisors directed the Marin County Parks Department staff to work toward preparing a renewal measure for the June ballot. So Max Korten is here with us today to present the proposed changes to the ordinance and expenditure plan, as well as next steps in getting the renewal measure on the June ballot. So a little bit more about our speaker. Max Korten has been the director and general manager of Marin County Parks since May of 2016. Marin County Parks is comprised of 34 open space preserves, 4 regional parks, and more than 40 other park facilities across 16,000 acres. Max joined the county in 2014 as a parks and open space superintendent. Prior to his work at the county, he was the director of the Natural Resources Program and Contracting at Conservation Corps North Bay. Before that, he worked as a wilderness ranger and trail crew supervisor for the U.S. Forest Service and U.S. Bureau of Land Management. Max earned an environmental studies degree from UC Santa Cruz and a master's in natural resource science from Humboldt State University. And with that, I am going to turn this meeting over to Max.
Thank you, Nancy, and thanks to all of you for inviting me to join you. And I'm going to share my screen here. Hopefully you all can see that. And that was a great introduction. It covers actually some of the stuff, the intro to what I was going to talk about here. So I will, I'll go through this relatively quickly. So as was mentioned in 2012, 74% of voters in Marin County approved Measure A, percent sales tax that funds parks and open space and farmland. I'll get more into what that funded in a minute. And as was mentioned, it sunsets this year. And so we've been working to put a re-implementation of the measure on the ballot for actually quite a while. We were planning to do so in 2020, and then the COVID-19 pandemic came, and pretty much our whole team got repurposed to supporting vaccinations, testing, everything, the whole county's efforts around COVID. So we put off the extension of the measure. And so we came back in June after Marin Open Space Trust did a poll that found 80% support, over 80% support. We were looking to put an extension on the recall ballot, but some state legislation made it so we're not able to do that. And so we've been working towards putting the extension on the June 2022 ballot. And I'll talk about where we are in that process in a minute. But first, I just want to take an opportunity to talk about, what Measure A has meant for Marin County parks and open space, and really for the county as a whole. And the measure funds Marin County Parks, the open space district, as well as all of the city and town and special district parks around the county. And then also has a grant program to fund the acquisition of farmland easements, and then also stewardship on farmland through the Resource Conservation District. I'll talk more about that in a minute. But first, because it's my world, I want to talk about Marin County Parks and how it's affected us. So, wildland fire prevention is a huge focus for Marin County Parks and Open Space. If you look at our preserves, they ring all of the urban and suburban communities in Marin County. They're not one big contiguous area of land like Point Reyes or the Marin Municipal Water District lands are. They're really spread out as sort of green belts around developed areas. And so because of that, there's a lot of wildland urban interface that we manage. There's over 3,500 homes that back up against open space preserves. And so we work closely with all the fire departments to manage for fuels reduction around those communities. And also, with keeping an eye on the natural environment and how we can pair reducing fire hazard with improving the natural condition of the preserves. And Measure A has really allowed us to step up around that. Before Measure A, we were spending about $250,000 a year on fuels reduction and had a pretty small program. At this point, we're spending around $2 million a year on fuels reduction, and really a lot more able to manage some of those really critical wildland urban interface lands. But that work happens every single year. It's the vegetation keeps growing, so it keeps having to be managed. And then, park maintenance improvements. A lot of the park facilities in Marin County were first built or developed in the 1970s and 80s, and they, need pretty significant deferred maintenance updates. And, this is just an example. This picture here is of the Sausalito multi-use path, which is our most visited facility in the county. And we recently repaved that path, support from Measure A, just an example of the work that we're doing. But really it's extend to all the parks and preserves that we manage. And then trail, I gotta minimize this. So our road and trail work, we have, I think, over 150 miles of fire roads and trails that are really loved by the community. And, but a lot of them were built as old ranch roads or logging roads. And so Measure A has allowed us to do projects that both increase the sustainability of that road and trail system, reduce environmental impacts, and also improve access for the community. Another real focus of our work with Measure A is equity, partnering with community organizations to provide access for folks who might otherwise have barriers to accessing parks and open space preserves. We have a community grant program that's funded by Measure A. There we're able to reduce and eliminate many of our fees, make the swimming pool at McNear's Beach free, cut in half the fee for access on weekends to all the regional parks. And then we created a library pass program with the libraries that makes it so that anyone with a library card can check out a parks pass and have free access to any of our parks. We also have a park prescription program that partners with Marin Community Clinics to provide park activities for their folks who need support. And that's been a really exciting program that we've seen great results from. And then we also manage Rocky Grand Park in Marin City with Measure A funds. And then, another big focus of our work has been, adapting these really unique ecosystems to climate change through multiple ways. One, through sort of larger projects around sea level rise adaptation and restoration to improve marshland and to help our parks and preserves on the bay shore and the coast adapt to sea level rise. And then biodiversity protection, working with our other land management partners through OneTAM to understand the biodiversity and help manage and improve biodiversity at a landscape level. Restoring wetlands, and then land acquisition was another part of the vision of Measure A. And through Measure A, we're able to complete acquiring some preserves and parks that have really been on the wish list of the communities we serve for decades, including Bowman Canyon up in Novato and Bucks Landing down in San Rafael and others. And so, this measure has really been critical to the work that we do. And so we've been working towards the extension of this measure. And so, as was mentioned, June 22nd, we presented the results of this poll that found really strong support to the Board of Supervisors. And then the board directed us to have a really open transparent engagement process with the community to consider any potential changes to the expenditure plan, the ordinance. We launched a community survey on August 5th and had about over 2,700 community members respond to that. Additionally, I met with about 45 different community groups to get more sort of in-depth feedback about the measure and the expenditure plan. We presented to the Board of Supervisors and our commission the results. And then based on those results, we presented a draft changes to the ordinance and the expenditure plan on November 12th. We got more feedback to that proposal, again, our commission in a public meeting, and then to the Board of Supervisors on December 14th, and got more feedback and got some really good feedback from the Board of Supervisors, who will make the ultimate decision on this, that sort of helped to make further changes to that proposal that I'll talk about today. And then I'll talk about next steps at the end. Overall, the key themes that we've heard from the community through all this engagement process is just the longstanding importance of parks and open space land and open farmland to the identity of Marin County, and that people really live here and have moved here because they like to be close to nature, and that the protecting and preserving that is really important to this community. The other thing we really heard was how important parks are and trails and open space, that especially during the pandemic, that getting out into parks and open space was really part of people's mental health, both for themselves and then also as a safe place to connect with loved ones and friends and family. Another thing we heard was increased concern and awareness about the risk of wildfire. The last 4 or 5 years have had, really devastating wildfire seasons across the state and the country. And I think we're all aware that with climate change, wildfire is part of our world. And so that's something that's, been a key part of our work with Measure A, but it's something that people are interested in continuing to be highlight. And then an increased awareness about climate change. We also heard a mix of opinions about the farmland piece of Measure A, the grant program that we administer. Concerns about whether that was still the right fit, and some ideas for how it could be changed. And then, another thing that has been part of the measure throughout is a commitment to oversight and transparency. And we heard also that was really important. So this is just a high level look at the allocations from the existing measure. 65% goes to Marin County Parks and Open Space to protect natural resources, to maintain parks and open space lands. 20% goes to a grant program to protect farmland. It mostly goes to funding agricultural easements that make sure that farmland is not developed, and that additionally it is maintained as productive farmland. And then another small amount of that, currently 5% of the 20%, goes to the Marin Resource Conservation District for stewardship projects on farmland. And then 15% goes to city, town, and special district parks across the county. After hearing from the community, this was sort of the initial proposal that we put out based on the feedback that we'd heard, increasing the county parks and open space component to 75%, reducing and broadening the scope of the agriculture component to 10%, and then keeping the city and town parks component the same. And after getting feedback from the Board of Supervisors, we're back a little closer to our original, the existing allocations, but with some modest changes. So keeping the county parks and open space component at 65%, keeping the farmland piece at 20%, but changing, broadening the scope of it, a little bit, and I'll describe that more. And then keeping cities and towns the same. And just quickly talk about accountability and oversight. You know, the existing measure has a 5% cap on administrative costs. So it's really focused on direct service to the community. There's a community oversight committee, and actually there's a few openings coming up on that committee in case any of you are interested. There are annual independent financial audits. And one thing that we heard interest in that is incorporated into our proposed extension is an opportunity to revisit the expenditure allocations after 4.5 years, so halfway through the measure. And then this is looking a little bit more deeply into the current proposal for the measure based on the feedback we heard from the Board of Supervisors. And I've been working with a subcommittee of the Board of Supervisors, Rodoni and Rice, that have given me impact as well, or feedback as well since the last board meeting. So keeping the county parks open space allocation at 65%, but creating a new 25% designation within that. That would be specifically to fund fire fuel reduction. We've been funding it just through our budget process at around $2 million a year. And so this would increase that modestly, and would also sort of create a requirement that those funds go towards fuels reduction. And then reducing the land acquisition component from what's currently 20% down to 10% and broaden it to include capital improvements on acquired properties. The initial measure, I think over the lifetime of the measure, it's generated about $16 million for land acquisition, and we've spent about half of that. So there's still a little over $8 million in reserve. And so we didn't want to take too much of the potential extended measure to set aside for acquisitions when potentially other projects might be more critical. And then keeping 65% for park facilities and improvements, roads and trails, wetland restoration, other components. And then the proposed changes to the sustainable agriculture component, this 20%, would repurpose this component to include a broader set of goals and align with the county's climate goals, including carbon capture farming practices, funding ecosystem services to support soil health and water quality on working lands, sustainable local food supply and community gardens, wildlife corridors and habitat protection on working lands, and also agricultural easements, but capping the amount that of this 20% that could be spent on easements at 50% of the 20%. And then increasing the Marin RCD stewardship fund to 20% of the 20%. And this is just a look at the total dollar figures. So the last year we brought in about $15 million in sales tax revenue. And this is on the left here, you can see how that breaks down currently with the existing allocations. And on the right, you can see how it would break down in the future based on these proposed allocations. And then these are the next steps. So next week on the 20th of January, I'll be presenting this exact slideshow with maybe some very slight changes to the Parks and Open Space Commission. And they'll consider recommending the expenditure plan ordinance to the Board of Supervisors. And then on February 8th, we'll come to the Board of Supervisors with an initial hearing of the ordinance sales tax expenditure plan. We'll be back on the 15th for the final hearing and the resolution to place the measure on the ballot. And then March 11th is the deadline for us to submit that to the Elections Department. And that is the end of my slideshow. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Max. We are just looking in the chat right now to see if anybody has any questions. I do have one until we get some more. When would this measure sunset? How long does this extend out?
Yeah, so I think what we're looking at is a 9-year extension of the measure. That was what, there was really strong support for in our survey.
So that 4.5-year review of the allocations, like halfway through.
Yeah, correct. Exactly. And that's similar to, I think TAM has a similar sort of component to their transportation sales tax measure.
Right.
Susan, you have a question?
Yes, thank you. The poll, I guess you'd call it, that the open space district was, it was just out for the public to state their responses to your specific questions. I think the Marin Open Space Trust did a survey by a professional survey company. Do you have the results? I don't know what the results were of their survey, but do you have that information?
Yeah, thanks, Susan. Yeah, so the Marin Open Space Trust, as I mentioned, did a poll in June of 2021 and found that was when I mentioned that over 80% support for the extension of the measure. That came from Marin Open Space Trust's poll. And yeah, that was, a scientific poll that was based on a random sampling of potential voters, whereas our community survey was just anybody could take it. There was no random sampling, and it didn't necessarily gauge potential support.
Thank you.
Elaine? You're muted, Elaine.
Max, what areas are more controversial than others?
That's a great question. I mean, I think, what's really cool, and from my perspective, because my world is county parks and open space, is that I think, people love county parks, love city parks, national parks, state parks. People love their parks in Marin County. And I don't think, and that's mostly what this funds is parks. And I don't, that's really not controversial at all. I haven't heard much concerns about that. I think most of the challenging conversations have been around the 20% that goes to farmland preservation. And, I think there's been a variety of perspectives that we've heard. I mean, I think to try to describe some of the perspectives, I think there's been some concerns about MALT, Marin Agricultural Land Trust, who's been the grantee of the majority of the funds, just their governance and some of the issues they've had over the past several years. Another concern has been around climate change, and we've really heard a variety of perspectives, right? On the one hand, concern that, dairies and other cattle, based farming operations contribute to greenhouse gas emissions. On the flip side of that, Marin has really been, Marin dairies and farmers have been leaders in developing ways to capture carbon through that process and also to sequester carbon through farming practices. So, different perspectives on that through the program. And then also sort of changing feelings about, protecting land and sort of wanting to balance equity and housing and other community needs with the ongoing desire to protect open space and land and natural land. So just a variety of perspectives about it. Yeah, and I think that's what sort of led to broadening and this proposal to broaden and diversify the grant program So it could fund really a greater variety of things and probably a greater variety of organizations than just malt.
Thank you, Max, very much.
Max, I have a question. The other day I was talking to a friend about Measure A, just beginning a conversation about it. And she immediately began talking about elk. And I think that the Point Reyes Elk thing is going to be confusing and a distraction around Measure A. What can be done to kind of make it clearer that this is not the same thing?
That's a great point. I mean, I think I definitely heard that a lot, especially initially as we were getting feedback. Is Point Reyes National Seashore just wrapped up their general management plan update, and a big issue that was a part of that update was, whether to continue agricultural leases and sort of the controversy that you mentioned between wanting to promote, allow Thule elk to broaden their habitat, and concern about the ongoing, cattle ranching and dairy ranching on the national park land. So, in our county parks and open space, there are no populations of Thule elk, and hasn't really been a component of what we do. But yeah, those concerns sort of got brought over because there's also, this farming component to Measure A. And I think, one of the opportunities right now, we've really been, my goal has been to be sort of in listening mode and gathering feedback and ideas from folks. And, we're wrapping up this process in the next month or so of figuring out where we're going to land on the expenditure plan. But I think the opportunity after that is to switch into an education communications mode where we can describe, once we know exactly what the expenditure plan is in the ordinance, then we can really work at describing what that is and what it isn't, so that folks have a stronger idea of what it is. And of course, there's some things that my team can do as public employees around education about measure. And there's other things that a campaign can do that we can't.
Yeah, it strikes me that this is kind of an opportunity to educate people in Marin County about what Measure A has done for us in relation, not just to, keeping our county parks up and running, but the climate change component, the projects. When I watched the presentation you did for the commission, I was so impressed by the scope of the projects that these funds have made possible. And I don't know how you showcase these things. I don't know how you get this out to the public, but I just think it would be a wonderful thing to do.
Thanks. Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, I think that's the exciting thing that we get to do, is tell the story of what we've been able to accomplish, and look forward to, partnering with you, partnering with, all the community organizations that we can connect with to figure out what are all the best ways to tell that story, so folks can understand the impact of this funding on their community. It's great. Thank you.
Thanks, James. Linda.
Hi. I know another, from my perspective, controversial aspect to this was wildfires, and how people were saying, why is malt getting the money where it should go to wildfires? Can you elaborate on that just a little bit more, and how that is not really it's an important part of it, but how you look at wildfires as an overall?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Yeah, that has been, we did a similar, survey, community survey back maybe 3 or 4 years ago, asking folks, what were their top areas of concern to inform how we budgeted Measure A. And we heard wildfire prevention was the #1 concern that community members had in that survey. And I think it continues to be the case. And, like I mentioned about our preserves, as they sort of ring those developed areas in Marin, it's been a really big focus of ours to do that work to protect communities and partner with the fire departments. And so, part of this proposal is actually, creating a new designation within our parks and open space piece to kind of increase our investment around fire. There was a push to make that investment significantly larger than what we're proposing, to make it 1/3 of the entire measure, which would be, I can't remember what that total dollar amount, maybe like $5 million a year. And this would, our proposal would make about 2.5, so double what we're proposing. I think, gosh, it's certainly really important. And the newly formed Marin Wildfire Protection Authority that was funded by Measure C has been a really great partner with the local fire departments to plan that type of work. But, we also balance all the other work with Measure A, managing parks and improving them and doing restoration and improving trails and maintaining them. So, and then I think what we heard from the Board of Supervisors was an ongoing interest in supporting the ag lands in West Marin and the stewardship of those lands. And so, based on all that feedback, I'm hoping that we're striking the right balance between all those things.
Susan?
Thank you. I support your pulling back the amount of the wildfire allocation, and there hasn't been much discussion about the fact that we passed a measure last year that provides $19 million for the county annually for wildfire suppression and wildfire work. And considering that the open space district has, I think it's about 1% of the county lands in their jurisdiction, having a large part of the open space allocation for wildfire work, when there's so much work that needs to be done. This last run of Measure A has provided the county the ability to do the planning for a number of the preserves and improving their trails and fire trails. And now we need the money to implement those plans. I see putting a lot of money into wildfire suppression is not really the role of a Measure A type of measure. But that's my opinion. Thank you.
Thanks, Susan. Yeah, I think that's the balance we're trying to strike, is hearing folks how important wildfire is and the importance of it and our managing the wildland and urban interface lands. And so creating that 25% of the 65% allocation, and at the same time, not going overboard so that we have enough money to do all those other cool things I think folks are excited about and hoping for. So yeah, I appreciate that. And yeah, I agree. To me, it's like really the exciting, without Measure A, before that, we were sort of duct tape and baling wire, just like trying to clean the restrooms. That was about it. And so with Measure A, we're able to really take care of the lands and the trails and all the things that people love and out in this county. And yeah, try, as the future changes and the environment that we're living in changes, we're able to adapt these things so that hopefully we can keep going and enjoying these special places.
So appreciate your being with us here today, and you will be hearing from us. And I just want to echo what Nancy said, thanking you for all you do in managing this system in this amazing county that we have. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. All right. Well,